welcome to your 12th R tutorial. In this tutorial I'm going to continue talking about data frames, specifically how to extract subsets of data from your data frames. To continue on from the last lesson, I'm going to continue to use the mtcars data frame. I'm going to use the head function to return the first few rows so we can get an idea on what this data frame looks like. Type it in, send it to the console, and we can see each of the variables and the first few rows of data. Now, before I delve into extracting subsets of data from the data frame, I'm going to refer to a particular column from this data frame and show you guys how to do that in R. Let's say I wanted to return all the values in that first column of that data frame, that mpg miles per gallon variable. To do that in R, I use the $ symbol, and let me show you guys how that works. The data frame is mtcars, then I use $mpg. I'm going to send it to the console and show you guys what happens. What you can see there is that the first 6 values that were returned by head in that mpg column match up with the first 6 values when I do mtcars $mpg. And I won't do it here, I'll leave that for you guys to check, but the rest of the values that were returned by mtcars $mpg do match up with the rest of the values in the mtcars dataset. Another thing that you can do with this column is perform operations on it. And I'll show you one of those operations now. Let's say I wanted to return a function that returned the mpg values that were greater than 20. To do that in R is somewhat intuitive. mtcars mpg greater than 20. What this will do is it will return what is called a logical vector. If you think about that statement, miles per gallon greater than 20, that has one of two values. Either it's true or it's false. That's exactly what this function is going to do. It's either going to return a value of true or false for each of these values. I'll send it to the console and show you guys the results. And as you can see, when we perform that operation, we get that vector of true and false values. Now there are contexts where this is very useful, but I want to show you how this is useful in the context of extracting subsets of data from a data set. Let's say we were doing an analysis, but we only wanted to look at records where the miles per gallon for the particular model of car was greater than 20 miles per gallon. To do that in R, the syntax is as follows. I'm going to type mtcars, and what this does is, if I just hit enter now, it would return the entire mtcars dataset. Recall in the lesson before, though, that one of the ways that we could extract subsets of data from our data frame was to use bracket notation. I'm going to do that now, and you can see I have a set of brackets right now. Also recall that when I use this bracket notation, I'm going to have a comma in the middle. To the left of the comma is going to refer to rows of the data frame. To the right of the column is going to refer to columns in that data frame. In this case, if you take a moment and think about it, I want to extract rows of data where the miles per gallon is greater than 20. And based on the way that I phrase that, I think you can see what function I'm going to put into this line of code right now. What I'm going to do is I'm going to do that. I'm just going to repeat exactly what I did in line 3, mtcars miles per gallon greater than 20. And before I hit enter, let me walk through the logic on what this is going to do. That first part is going to return the data frame, but the bracket notation says, wait a minute, don't return the entire data set to me. I only want to look at a particular part of that data set. Going inside the brackets, well, on the right hand side of that comma, it's blank. So it's going to return every single column in this data frame. However, on the right of that data set, and I just noticed I had the operator backwards, it's not really, for this demonstration I wanted to return miles per gallon greater than 20. I had less than 20 before. But anyway, this part of the code, which reads empty cars, $miles per gallon greater than 20, is going to return those records where the value in that MPG variable is greater than 20. I'm going to hit enter and take a look at the results. And eyeballing the results, you can see that everything in that MPG column is greater than 20. And I won't do it here. I'll leave that to you to check if you want. But all the records that were taken out of the empty cars data set had miles per gallon less than 20. And I'll just take a few minutes to talk about this notation a little bit. When I first started R, this is one of the hardest things for me to kind of get a handle of. Once you learn this notation, it becomes very simple, very easy. Once you get a lot of practice, you can hammer out these kind of lines of code almost without even really thinking about it. But for me, and from my understanding, from what I've read from a lot of other people who learn the R language, getting used to this bracket notation and the $ notation and using these logical vectors, it's a very steep learning curve. But if you think about it, it's also a very compact way of extracting information from this data set. As a comparison, a lot of you might be familiar with SQL. Usually to do a SQL statement that return the top 20 rows in a data set, it would require more code than I've written right here. I'm not trying to say that R is better than SQL or anything like that. I'm just kind of pointing out that a lot of these operations that you perform in data within R, they're very compact, very short. They might be hard to learn at first, but they're also very easy to understand, very logical once you get used to them. There's one last line of code that I want to show you guys and execute. Let's say in this particular example, we wanted to return records where the miles per gallon was greater than 20, but let's also say we only wanted to return certain columns of data. In other words, let's say that we only cared about miles per gallon and the displacement, and we didn't care about any of the other columns in our particular analysis. To do that in R, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to copy line number 4, copy and paste, save myself a little bit of typing. But this other part of the bracket notation that we haven't used yet, we can use that to extract the information that we want. Here we can place a vector that names the columns we want to pull out. And I'll show you what I mean by that. We're going to use that concatenate function that we've used several times before. And the more you use R, the more you'll see and actually use this concatenate function. If you want to write a vector on the fly, usually you're going to use this concatenate function. So I'm going to create that concatenate function. I'm going to write a character vector that names the columns I want to pull out. MPG and ASP. You can see the names down there below in the console. So when I run this line of code, what I expect is those same rows that were returned last time, but instead of returning every single column, it's only going to return those 2 columns that I asked for. And there we see it. The exact same rows that I had before, but with only 2 columns instead of all the columns that exist in that data set. So to keep these lessons short, I'm going to cut it off for now. I definitely will be talking a lot more about data frames. I'm not sure yet if it's going to necessarily be in the next video, but data frames are a huge part of the R language, and there's a lot to cover with them, and it's very important to understand how they work very well. But for this lesson, I'm going to leave it at that for now, and hopefully I'll see you guys next time.